So welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rolfe of Mentoring Works, and we're going to be looking at the aims of mentoring today, and specifically we'll be talking about the aims of mentoring relationships, the strategic aims, the actual organisational value, and how to focus mentoring to achieve measurable outcomes. So welcome everybody to the webinar, and we're just getting underway now. You know, people often say that people are our greatest assets, and while priorities often shift in this climate, one thing never changes. People really are our greatest assets. And while most people just say that, if you offer mentoring, you show you really mean it. That's why I love partnering with organisations that genuinely value their people and demonstrate it through mentoring. Strategically, mentoring is a cost-effective method for attracting, retaining and developing people if you do it right. And at Mentoring Works, we're all about mentoring for better outcomes. My company's been operating for 23 years, and Mentoring Works has been instrumental in the success of hundreds of mentoring programs. Our products and services support people and programs throughout the world, so we know what could go wrong and how to avoid costly mistakes that are all too easy to make. We know how to save you time and effort in creating mentoring conversations, relationships and programs that work. So I'd like to invite you to make the most of our time together. So just before we begin today, can I suggest to you that first of all, it will be helpful if you take plenty of notes. The webinar is meant to be interactive, and I'm going to be sharing quite a bit of information with you, so it would be great if you take some notes. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll upload it to the website so that you can actually watch it again later on if you wish. I would encourage you to ask questions, and for those of you who haven't been on a webinar before, I just want to direct your attention to the panel that you should be seeing on your screen. It has a little hands up icon that will allow you to put your hand up if you want to ask a question. There's two ways you can ask a question. If you have a microphone, you can actually speak your question, and what I'll do is I'll notice your hand is up, I'll call upon you, and then I will unmute your microphone so that you can actually speak to us all. If you prefer not to speak, you can simply type your question in the little question panel that you can see there now. If you prefer to ask an anonymous question, just write anon, or type anon in at the beginning of your question, and I'll be able to respect your privacy that way. Otherwise, I'll be greeting you by name if you or reading your question out and mentioning your name if you've typed it in. So just rest assured, though, that I won't call on anyone or turn your microphone on unless you've actually got your hand up. The microphones are all muted at the moment so that we cut out any background noises that can be quite distracting. The other thing is it's very helpful for you if you wear a headset so you can hear quite clearly, and some of those have a built-in microphone. So hopefully you all have a microphone. If you want to speak, you'll be able to do that today. So let's move into our topic. And as I said, we're talking about the aims of mentoring. And in terms of the aims of mentoring relationships, we know that people in mentoring relationships can achieve increased self-awareness, personal and professional development, enhance critical and creative thinking. They get an outcome focus. It helps them develop their independent decision-making, improve problem-solving, and using that reflection, deciding, planning, action cycle. But if you want to produce these outcomes, you need to develop your mentoring strategy. I did invite questions before the webinar, and there were a few, and some of those questions were a little bit beyond the scope of what we're covering today, so I've emailed those people, and we're going to talk later offline about their questions that are beyond the scope of today's webinar. However, this question actually was sent in that's extremely relevant, and as you can see, what's the best way to start a mentoring program? And this sounds like a very large mentoring program, and in my opinion, whether your mentoring program is large or small, the best starting point for any strategy is to get very clear about your intentions, what it is you actually aim to achieve. And The success and failure of a mentoring strategy depends on many things, but one thing I can tell you is that you won't be able to demonstrate its success if you haven't identified what you hope to achieve. So your mentoring aims actually lay the foundation for your mentoring program and provide the framework for mentoring. They link your organisation's needs to the purpose of your mentoring program, and they help you identify measurable outcomes for mentoring. So this is a Q&A type webinar, and I have a question for you. How well supported is mentoring in your organisation? And I'm actually going to launch a poll now which allows you to respond to this question, and you have several choices, and you can choose as many of these as are appropriate to you. Just bear with me for 1 second. I'm just about to launch your poll. So if you could respond to these questions. And you can respond to those questions just by clicking on as many as are appropriate for you. Okay? Okay, so it looks as though we've still got a few people to respond to some of those polls. Okay, so I'm going to close that poll now and share with you the results. If you haven't, I'm going to close it in just 1 second. Anyone else who wants to vote will click a response. Okay, let's have a look at the responses to these polls. So, of those who responded to these polls, we've got 25% who are saying senior management wholeheartedly support mentoring, which is great for that 25%, but it could be a bit difficult for those who don't have the full support of senior management. No one is saying they've got enough budget, people and time. I wonder if we ever have enough of that. But we are getting a good response to the idea that managers do support their people's involvement. That is probably the most critical factor. We're getting some people saying, yes, mentoring is valued by participants and non-participants, which is an important factor. And just a few, so we've got a waiting list to participate. Now, if you answered no to any of those questions, I would suggest to you that this webinar is going to be very helpful to you, because without clear aims, it's quite hard to get support for mentoring. It's very difficult to promote the value of mentoring and challenging to make it a priority for people. So getting clear about your aims will help you. The other side to this is that as well as having clear aims yourself, you do need to communicate those aims very well. And can I recommend an earlier webinar that we did earlier this year, which is recorded and on the website, on the webinars page, and it's called How to Get the Mentoring Message Across. And if you look at that webinar, listen to that webinar, you'll get some great ideas there for communicating your message across. So, and who to communicate to and how to do that. So having clear aims and communicating those well will increase your ability to respond to those questions very positively. So in terms of mentoring programs, we aim to produce strategic value to the organisation as well as personal benefits. And if you're going to do that, you need to clarify what you intend for people to get out of the mentoring as well as the strategic goals that it links to. So to answer this question, why mentoring, you need to uncover the needs and the wants and the issues that mentoring will address from the perspective of the organisation and the people involved. So when you look at what organisations need and why they have mentoring programs, it usually falls into one of four very broad categories. It's about perhaps employee engagement, the need to attract, retain and develop people for increased productivity, or it might be about knowledge management to prevent the loss of both tacit and implicit information, and we're seeing a lot of need for that now as our ageing workforce gets ready to leave their employment, and a lot of experience and knowledge is going to walk out the door with them. Sometimes it's about skills development for improved capability, or it can be about culture change to influence behaviour based on values, assumption, common practice for enhanced organisational performance. So I'm wondering which one of these broad strategic aims of mentoring programs is applicable to you, and I'm going to launch another poll right now that asks you to identify which area is most relevant to you. So in a moment you're going to have coming up on your screen 5 responses, and once again you can choose as many as are applicable to you. So in your organisation, is the strategic aim of mentoring employee engagement, so attract and retain and develop people? Is it about skills development? Is it about knowledge management, culture change, or is it something else? Okay, the vote's coming in now. The polling's coming in. I'm going to close this in just a few seconds. Okay, looks like everyone has responded. So let's have a look at what your responses were. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the majority of people are looking at mentoring for skills development. The next highest response is in the area of knowledge management. Some are looking at culture change and employee engagement, and there are a few people talking about other. Now, what I'm going to do is actually open the microphones for anyone who wants to, anyone who would like to make a comment at this stage about the strategic aim of mentoring. Now, Grant, I can see you've got your hand up. So I'm going to unmute your, I'm going to turn your microphone on, Grant. Are you there, Grant? Hello, Grant.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Grant.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, sure, Anne. I'm happy to make a comment. Certainly with us, our mentoring program, as you're aware, is slightly different to the traditional in-house mentor programs, and therefore other is important to us because we're trying to help small businesses through a mentoring program to make that important decision whether they should actually start their operation or not, or whether it's economically viable. So others important for us.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Grant. Is there someone else who would like to make a comment on the strategic aim of your mentoring program? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up. Okay, so we'll continue on now. And this is actually an exercise that I like to do on a whiteboard, but you can simply do it on a sheet of paper. So we're going to start looking at developing these strategic aims. We're going to narrow down the very broad aims that you've identified so far. So if you've got a sheet of paper there, what I suggest you do is rule it up in 4 columns. And the first column, perhaps on the left, you can label strategic aims. The second column, you can label program purpose. The third column is target groups. And the fourth is realistic objectives. So go ahead and just rule up a page with 4 columns, 4 headings. First heading is strategic aims. Second heading is program purpose. Third heading is target groups. And the fourth is realistic objectives. And what we're going to do next then is to actually workshop these strategic aims. So the idea here is we started with the broad aims. Now we want to get a bit more specific. So what are the drivers for your program? For example, is it from a strategic point of view? Is it about reducing turnover? Is it about knowledge transfer? So in the area of knowledge management, you're actually looking at a transfer of knowledge. Is it about succession planning? So write down as many of these as is appropriate for you under the heading of strategic aims. And once again, I can open the microphones for you if you want to make a comment or ask a question as we're doing this exercise. So I'm hoping that you're jotting down now some strategic aims, because what we go on to next is the actual program purpose and target group. So here's where you think about the broad aims and the focus of mentoring. And again, you do need to think strategically about this, because you want to target your program where it will do the most good, where it's going to get the most traction and where you'll get the most bang for your buck. I'll give you a couple of examples here. I've worked with a number of organisations who identified a need to reduce staff turnover. So we need to look at where are they most vulnerable. In one case, it was new employees that they were losing. In another, it was Indigenous people. And another one again was young professionals. So their graduates were coming into the organisation and they were losing them very quickly. These days, it's often the ageing population, the ageing employees that are looking forward to retirement that we know we're going to lose at some stage in the future. However, if you start to make these distinctions, it helps you clarify both the program purpose and realistic objectives for your mentoring program. In these cases that I mentioned, where I've worked with other organisations, we were able to identify who was leaving, so where they were most vulnerable, and then find out why they were leaving and what would cause them to stay. And that allowed us to design our program specifically to meet those needs, to help where the organisation was most vulnerable. So I'm going to invite any comments or questions that you have again now. So I'm seeing there's Grant's question that we looked at earlier. If anyone has a question or a comment at this stage, love you to put up your hand. I can open up your microphone or you can type in. Just pausing for questions, comments. Okay, so we will continue. And so having looked at the strategic aim, the program purpose, and starting to think about who you'd want to target for mentoring, we can then start to think about, okay, what would we want these people to actually achieve? And here are some examples of programs that have gone through this process of identifying the program purpose. Looking at reducing staff turnover, we knew that we wanted to support new employees, provide career development, career progress for people, skills development, personal development, improve the knowledge transfer in the organisation and share some of that tacit information. And so you can get more specific now in terms of what you would want people to actually do. So when we start to look at the realistic objectives that you might set for your program, you want to also look at the questions, what might indicate success for you? What could you actually measure? What sort of tangible outcomes could be produced? And how else would you know that mentoring was being successful? Now, you need to remember that some of the benefits of mentoring are quite subtle or even intangible. They can be very long-term, and some of them remain unknown or unconscious. But in terms of return on investment, you may or may not need to put a dollar value on outcomes, but if you want to know your mentoring works, at the very least, you'll need to identify some of these success indicators. And I'd like you to start thinking about this now and see how many you can list. So for mentoring, for you, what might indicate success? Write down some things you might be able to measure Are there tangible outcomes that you can point to, or is there something else that you could that would let you know that your mentoring is actually a success? Why don't you write some things down now, and I'm going to open up the microphones, or you can type in your ideas and we'll share some of the success indicators that you've found for mentoring. I'm going to pause for about 30 seconds now while you type or write a response to what are the success indicators that you could or have identified for mentoring. So if there's someone who would like to share a success indicator that they have identified, if you put your hand up, I will open your microphone, or if you prefer, you can type it in the question comment box. Okay, so here are some that I'll share with you. These are measurable outcomes that actually can demonstrate a return on investment for mentoring. So such things as staff retention, and a number of programs that I've run, we have measured before and after mentoring the impact on staff that actually stay with the organisation. Another program actually looked at return to work after maternity leave. So we looked at the figures that were there before the mentoring program, and then there was a program that actually linked women who were on leave, and this would work equally well with fathers who took time out of the workforce to care for their new offspring, and measure the retention of those people who can otherwise be lost to the organisation, and the program actually helped them to stay in touch and return. So a good measure before and after. Some of the programs I've run for particular target groups, such as Indigenous people or women, have looked at what's the representation of the target group in terms of those positions and locations. So we looked before and after the mentoring to see what difference there was. Also, you can measure the percentage of applicants for internal job roles or openings. And also from that you can look at the number of that target group who actually obtained a position. You can also measure the number of the target group who participate in training programs and development opportunities. Often I find that organisations do provide training programs and development opportunities, and people may not be applying for them who are indeed eligible and desirable from the organisation's perspective. So mentoring can have an impact on that. If your mentoring program is aimed at attracting employees, or for example becoming an employer of choice, you can measure the number of external applicants for jobs that you're getting. And these days of social networking, and we know that that younger people respond to the recommendations of their peers, so the message soon gets around, and you can measure that. If you're fortunate enough to have some benchmarking that you can compare to, that will also give you another measure in terms of the outcomes of your programs. Anyone want to comment or ask a question on these measurable outcomes, or suggest other ways you could measure the results of your mentoring and perhaps demonstrate either a return on investment or some of the things that are perhaps less tangible in terms of outcomes? So if you'd like to put your hand up to make a question or comment. Okay, here's Grant again. Just a second. Okay, Grant, I'm going to switch on your microphone. What can you add?
I've actually got a couple of questions there. I noticed in one of the earlier slides, Anne, that you mentioned about using mentoring for culture change. My first question is, does it work? And the second is, if it does, how do you actually measure that?
Okay, thanks, Grant. Very good question. And in terms of culture change, does it work? Well, I believe that it does, and the measures, a lot of organisations these days are actually doing culture surveys, And so you can do a before and after measure on your culture surveys, and you can have some specific questions there. In terms of culture change, I always think of an organisation, you know, we sort of call it the organisation as if it were a separate entity, but I guess you can look at it that way. But if you do, it's useful to think of, well, if an organisation is an entity, what's it made up of? Its cells, if you like, or its life systems are in fact the people in it. So when you change people, you change culture. And the greatest influence on people are the people that they interact with. One of my favourite sayings is, or quote, is that you'll be the same in 5 years' time as you are today, except for the books you read and the people you meet. And it's meeting people, interacting with people, having conversations that actually open up your mind to other possibilities and other points of view that literally change your mind in some cases. And when people's minds are changed, often their behaviour follows suit. And certainly, I think culture is largely to do with the state of mind, the attitudes and the behaviours of people that are there. So, yeah, so does that answer your question, Grant?
It does in a way, except that I used to work for a very large, and I won't mention their name, but a very large national organisation, one of the largest, and one of its biggest challenges was culture, and it spent a fortune, not through mentoring, trying to change culture. And I've been out of their organisation for nearly 10 years now, but I still read the papers and I see the culture has not changed.
Yeah.
They're a constant, and it is a real challenge for big companies. Cultures become ingrained, and I just wondered whether mentoring might be a very useful tool, probably not the only one that might, and I just wondered how effective it might be about changing culture.
Yeah, I don't have any studies or statistics to quote for you, but yeah, as I said, my philosophy is that culture is made up of people, and people are changed through the interactions they have with other people. And so if you have a positive relationship with someone through mentoring, of course, and this brings into mind too, what you've got to do in selecting your mentors is to make sure that the people who are involved in mentoring actually share some of the values and the values that support the culture that is desired by the organisation. And the other thing you've got to remember that informal mentoring happens all the time. Is it positive or is it negative? Are the messages that are being communicated by the words and deeds of the people, are those the ones that are desirable in the desired culture, or are they counterproductive? And if so, those are the individuals that possibly need some mentoring. So it's sort of almost a cascading effect throughout the organisation. And it is, to me, it's like throwing the pebble in the pool and watching the ripples spread out to the edge of the pool. Of course, you've got to have a critical mass of people who share those values and act in those positive ways that are wanted by the culture to actually shift the culture and make an obvious difference. But yeah, I still come back to the idea people are most influenced by other people. Did you want to say anything else, Grant?
Good points. No, very good points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Grant. Anyone else want to make a comment, either in response to Grant or another question there? Okay. Okay, so to summarise what we've covered so far, or covered in this webinar, is we've talked about the aims of mentoring relationships themselves and the sorts of benefits that individuals can obtain from mentoring relationships. We also talked about the strategic aims, that is the organisation value, and linking your mentoring program purpose to the strategic aims. And it's very important to look at what are the drivers of a mentoring program. Where is the organisation vulnerable? Where is it hurting? And where could mentoring actually make a difference? Where could it provide some leverage that would result in producing value for the organisation, because your funding, your support at all levels depends on how well you can make that link between what the mentoring program aims to do and what the strategic needs and the objectives of your organisation are. And then we talked about focusing on those measurable outcomes. And I want to make the point again that mentoring is notoriously difficult to measure. Many of the benefits are intangible. Some of them are quite subtle. They may not be obvious to the individuals, and many times they are quite long-term in terms of the results they produce. Nevertheless, it is very important to be able to point to some success indicators that will allow you to demonstrate the value of your program. So, if you have any further questions or comments, now's the time to ask them, because we're kind of coming to the conclusion of this Mentoring Aims webinar. So this is your pretty much final chance to ask a question or make a comment. Just looking for any hands that are going up here. Okay. Okay. Yvonne, I saw your hand go up. Did you have a question there, Yvonne? I've opened up your mic.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Yvonne.
Oh, that's lovely. Oh, well done, Anne, and it's great to hear you. Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that measurement, so that you've got proof, and you've covered it, you know, quite comprehensively. But I'm just wondering, how have you actually? Can you give us a real example of how you've been able to prove the value, and therefore, you know, continuing in this kind of role over a period of years? Have you been able to do that?
Okay, thanks, Yvonne. The slide that I showed before with the measurable outcomes, and I might just see if I can. I'm not sure if I can get back to that that actual slide here. Yeah, so these measurable outcomes are things that are pretty easy to measure, as long as you do a before measure as well as then have an after measure. The other thing is that you can't necessarily measure them immediately. So if you had a 12-month mentoring program, your results probably aren't going to show up necessarily immediately. If you're not measuring hard data, then you've got to pretty much rely on qualitative data, information you obtain from the participants themselves. So you need to actually develop some questions that you're going to ask people. And the other difficulty with measuring the results of mentoring, or proving the value of mentoring that way, is, and you would know this yourself, Yvonne, that when you develop, especially when you develop incrementally, you sort of forget where you were at the beginning. It's kind of difficult to see how far you've come unless you've got some notes about that. So some mentoring programs, we do a self-assessment questionnaire at the beginning. Other mentoring programs, we actually ask people to keep a journal, not to share publicly, but simply for themselves. And then in the evaluation process, we actually ask them to go back to their original notes and make comments about the sorts of issues they've worked through and the benefits they've gained. The other thing that I do is not wait till the end of a mentoring program or the end of a mentoring relationship. In one of my publications, the Mentoring Journal, I actually have a template that is printed a number of times in the book. The Mentoring Journal is a publication that people are encouraged to use during their mentoring relationship. So it actually has a guide to mentoring conversations in there, as well as a debrief template. And so in the debrief template, the idea is, and this is what I train people to do in workshops, the idea of the debrief is towards the end of a mentoring conversation. So if you've been talking for half an hour the last 5 minutes, if you've been lucky enough to have an hour the last 10 minutes, you actually spend summarising the outcomes of the mentoring conversation. So you're doing it every time you have that conversation. And you ask questions like, what did we achieve in this meeting? What did we find? So as the mentor, you're asking the person you're mentoring, what did you find most useful or helpful? What did you value in the mentoring conversation? You can also ask them what challenges they experienced, what was difficult, and what insights or learning did they gain, and how will they apply that? What actions are they going to take? Now, this feels a little bit awkward when you first start doing it in a mentoring conversation, so people do need to be sort of encouraged to do this. But once you start doing it, you really find the value of doing this. You're getting feedback every single time you have a mentoring conversation. The feedback allows you to stay on track with a mentoring relationship. So if they're telling you, oh, this was difficult or that was difficult, you can look at, okay, well, what will we do differently next time that will make that easier or more productive? So I would recommend to you that at the end of every mentoring conversation, you do a short summary debrief, asking what did they value, what worked well, what you achieved, what did they find most helpful, any challenges, what insights did they actually gain, what did they learn, and how will they use that. Now, if they are actually tracking actions, you can both make a note of the actions that they commit to and then review that in the next mentoring conversation. So if you've had a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month mentoring relationship and you've been debriefing every time you've had a conversation, then you have some notes about what actions they have committed to. You've followed up on those actions the next meeting, so you will have some definite proof, if they've done their actions, that mentoring has had an effect. So Yvonne, a response?
Thank you. No, that was great. No, that actually was great. And I think you're so right. It's that debrief, isn't it? It's the debrief at the end.
Yes.
That gives your value and it gives the measure. If anyone else hasn't got a question, I've got another one.
Okay, fine.
So where's the dividing line between the mentor brought into support and the manager's role? What's your views on that?
Okay, that's a very good question, Yvonne, and it's one that you really need to sort out in the design part of your mentoring program. So the mentor is usually someone who is offline. That means that they're not in a direct line of authority or a direct line of command, if you like, and so that they can deal offline with the sort of issues that might come up. And you do have to manage this relationship because managers can feel quite threatened, so you want to keep them in the loop. So in terms of the mentor's role, the mentor has no authority over the person they're mentoring. That allows them to have a more objective point of view, but it also means that they can't be telling people what to do, and they need to be aware of the boundaries of the mentoring relationship so that they're not stepping in or stepping into the territory of the manager. They're not kind of influencing the person in that way. The mentor can't go to bat for the person they're mentoring and sort of charge in on their white horse and rescue them or do things for them. And it's not about managing performance. It's about a conversation in which the person being mentored can look at issues, can look at where they are, where they want to be, how they might get there, plan the sort of actions they want to take, and then go away, make their decisions and take their actions, come back and review. So the mentor is more like a sounding board. There's more information on the role of the mentor in the last webinar that we actually did last month. So there's another webinar that's recorded that goes through in more detail the role of the mentor. But it is important to make that distinction between manager, who's responsible for day-to-day performance of an individual, and mentor, who is offline, off to the side, not interfering in any way, certainly not overriding the manager, but they're really as a resource for the individual to discuss issues, set goals, set their own goals, make their own plans, and then action those. Thanks, Yvonne. Is there anyone else who has a question? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up for any further questions. I think I've got another question typed in. Okay, now that one we actually dealt with. That was from Grant. Grant's got his hand up again. Hi, Grant. Hello, Grant. Did you have another question?
Hi there. No, not a question, just seeing that it looks like it's coming to an end, I just want to, on behalf of all those online, just say thank you very much again, Anne. These are very, very useful, and I certainly appreciate them, and I suspect a lot of others do as well.
Well, thanks for that, Grant. I appreciate your comments. Just before we do finish up then, and I think we've covered the ground that I intended to cover, if you do have other questions and you'd like to actually email me, I'm happy for you to do that. I'll leave the session running for a little bit after we conclude properly, and you can type in additional questions there. I did mention before that our webinar last month on the role of the mentor was extremely popular, and there are a lot of questions there. As a result, I actually put together an ebook on the role of the mentor. It does complement my hard copy books that you see there, the Mentoring Guide, the Mentoring Conversation, and the Mentoring Journal, which I mentioned before when I was talking to Yvonne. So this ebook is actually free with any purchase that you make this month of the other materials. So if you would like more detail on the role of the mentor, that ebook covers all of the ground that we covered in the webinar last month. You can, of course, pop onto the website, go to the webinars page, and you'll see the role of the mentor webinar there, as well as the other webinar that I mentioned previously as well, which was how to get the mentoring message across, which I think would be of great value to you as well. I hope that today you've got some food for thought, and I hope that you'll take just a minute or two before you leave the webinar to actually jot down some notes, and of course type them in if you want to share them. What did you gain from participating in this webinar today, and how will you use that? So do take a minute to jot down for yourself a note, or type in if you'd like to do that, because the success of failure of your mentoring strategy depends on many things, but one thing you know how to do as a result of participating today is to demonstrate its success, because you've identified what you hope to achieve through mentoring. If you'd like further assistance through consulting, training or resources, please call me or email me. The phone number's there on the screen, and my email address is there too. My aim in this webinar was to give you something to think about and to use, and I hope you'll come back and share some of your ideas in our next complimentary Mentoring Works webinar. Keep an eye on the newsletter for your special invitation. Thanks very much for joining us today. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if you have any more questions or comments that you'd like to make, happy to do that. Thanks very much for participating. I'll leave the webinar running, but I'll stop the recording so that if you want to make a further comment or ask a question, type it in. You can do that now. Otherwise, that's the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for participating.